Welcome, listener or viewer. I'm Ian Kennedy, the host and creator of the Nothing to Gain podcast, a series of recorded interviews with influential protagonists from around the music scene over the last few decades. There's no agenda other than to enlighten, inspire, and at times, hopefully, amuse you. If you like what you see and want to support, you can do so by donating to the GoFundMe campaign by clicking the link in the video description. Please share with your friends and feel free to comment and offer your thoughts. Tres, dos, uno. And we're rolling. Mike Boorman, welcome.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
To see you, nice.
Can I call you the Right Honourable Mike Boorman, perhaps?
I prefer the Very Reverend.
Oh, okay. I was thinking maybe the Venerable as well.
The Venerable Boorman, I suppose, because of the Venerable Bede that, you know, and actually Saint Bede was plied his trade not too far from where I'm from, I believe.
So it fits.
Yeah, the Venerable Boorman. We've got it, nailed it. That should be my new DJ name. Imagine that on a flyer.
Yeah. It would certainly turn some heads, you know. I mean, I said that because I know that politically, you've worked within do they call them the annals of power?
The ugly corridors of power. Yeah, damn right.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems so long ago now, but actually, it was only the last general election. It was like this strange dream where, I just moved into a new place in Ibiza as well, like a nice new apartment in town.
Yeah.
And then there was the election call quickly. I had to dump all my stuff in my new apartment and fly back to England and spent 2 months in Election Central, which in my case was a constituency in rural Suffolk. What an absolute joke. I mean, I don't regret doing it. I'm glad that I saw it firsthand, but all of the negative preconceptions I had about the archaic nature of the system, you know, I was right. In fact, they're even worse than I imagined.
Right.
There's a lot of people pissing in the wind, you know, people banging on about, you know, people sharing articles from The Guardian saying, yeah, boo, the Tories, boo, boo, boo. All this time people waste arguing about whose side should be in power. I mean, to be honest, I don't think it makes a massive amount of difference who is in power, because the system trumps those who are trying to operate the system a lot of the time. And the kind of tricks you have to pull to get people to vote for you, you know, the swing voters. At its inception, by default, it cannot all be true. You know, the MP, the candidate that I was representing, even within her own constituency, when she was knocking on doors and I was writing leaflets, I was doing the campaign literature.
And what constituency is it? Before, actually, if you turn your mic down, just turn your mic down, Mike. Just a tiny bit, just a little bit.
Let's see. Am I clipping? The venerable Mike is clipping.
No, you've just got a very powerful and authoritative voice. So,
I'm now gonna. Right, how's that?
That's good. That's good. So what constituency was this? I'm interested. You're in rural Suffolk when you get back from Ibiza.
Suffolk East. I think it was. Actually,
roughly.
I mean, I knew it when I was writing the campaign literature, rest assured.
You knew then.
But even within a constituency, the candidate would put on a different face depending on which districts within the constituency. So we knew that certain parts of the constituency, right, we could talk a bit about Brexit and our stance on it, but others, the last thing we wanted was to talk about Brexit, and some of the constituency, we were trying to take the Tory vote, and some of the constituency, we were trying to take the Labour vote. It was the Lib Dem I was working for. I'm not even a Lib Dem, I just did it for the crack. I actually met her in Ibiza. But so that happens even within a constituency, right? If you think about that at a national level, if you read a whole party's manifesto, so much that is within the manifesto is actually kind of contradictory. Some of it looks quite left-leaning, some of it looks quite right-leaning. And to suit the particular audience, they're going to cite certain aspects of it. Yeah. So there are so many fallacies that lead up to the end goal of who wins or who loses an election. And then once you get in, how do you get policy through the House of Commons? That is literally random. There's a ballot, and then there's well, what's the public mood? Which part of the electoral cycle are we in? So many variables towards thinking something's a good idea and then actually making that change. And so much time wasted in arguing about it.
Do you think that the politicians who are obviously, I mean, one sort of analogy that I was thinking of when you talked about that hypocrisy, if you like, in terms of pandering or adapting your manifesto to different groups of the constituency, it is like selling a product and marketing it slightly differently. The way that Sky uses advertising, and it's very different type of advertising in Ireland than it is in England, and it's all selling the same thing essentially. How much do you feel that the politicians that get into those positions it's ideological, or how much is it just a functional behavior that they learn is necessary to get that seat, to become an MP?
I think most of them start steeped in ideology. I mean, I had, if I think of how I thought when I was 18, 19, 20, there was much more ideology behind my opinions than now.
Yeah.
And so, most political careers do start then. The fact of the matter is that, they'll probably go to a good university. They might end up in a think tank, or they'll be in, there might be a member of a political party, things like that. But then they realise that in order to get nominated to even be a political candidate, to be an MP or a councillor or whatever, there's a heck of a lot they have to do. First, they have to, they've got to build a following. I mean, there are similarities with being a DJ. You need to have your crew, the people who are going to deliver leaflets for you.
Yeah.
You need to prove to the party that you wish to represent that you have something behind you. And then within the party that you wish to represent, you need to look like someone that they think ought to be representing them. So in order to do that, you're going to have to compromise. You're probably going to show different parts of your ideology to different people within the Labour Party or within the Lib Dems or whatever. And so then just before you've even stood as a candidate, your original plan has to change.
Yeah.
So really, a big gripe that I have with this is that whatever the system is, okay, whether it's capitalism, whether it's, national state politics, any system of a certain size that purports to stand for the truth, it just can't. It just, because there are so many variables that make up the system.
Yeah.
And so people talk in so many absolutes that something's definitely wrong, that this is like that. And yet actually the equation is much more complex than they give it credit for, albeit I'm saying that I don't like the system and I think that it's wrong. But that's more on the grounds of how big it is and how much it tries to do, and also the way people think the system is, the way people delude themselves that they can find one answer out of it.
Yeah,
they can't.
Yeah, well, it's part of that is based on the fallacy of individualism and our role within a democratic society. That because we have a vote, because we have free speech and certain baseline expectations of what our lifestyles and our lives can assume, that we have with the vote not just our democratic freedom, but we've got a right to think that everyone else should think that way. And if they don't, then it's that's where the opposition arguments come. And a lot of elections are sort of fought out through the media, essentially, and the relationship with the press officers and what is the zeitgeist, what does the electorate want to hear, but that's not necessarily a realistic expectation. And like you say, within a big system, the idea of entropy and thermodynamics, that things lose energy. In a fixed system, there is a loss. There's a sort of a dissolution of certain principles at the beginning.
And I think that the system as it is did make more sense in the past when the population was less transient. People would have jobs for life. And even when I was a kid, it was pretty, where I'm from in the northeast of England, it's pretty obvious that if a Labour government was in, you're more likely to get a better deal for the majority of people from the village that I was from. But as time goes on, that is less the case. It is less obvious what each government is going to do for individuals. And I think it's notable that quite a lot of voters where I'm from deserted the Labour Party in the last election.
Yeah.
But because no longer is it. Well, frankly, there are not that many industrial jobs anymore to protect. Yeah. So then suddenly, what is the Labour Party? The Labour Party was always a bit of a mythical union between the intellectual left, the sort of the Jeremy Corbyn wing of it, the North London Guardian reading left, and the Scargill left, the people working down the mines and the shipyards. It was always a meeting of those two. And the Labour Party generally could rely on both sides they could rely on that vote. But now they can't, now they can't rely on the industrial side of it. And indeed, it's similar. It's similar in America. I mean, I don't live in America, but you can see that the Democrats and the Labour Party, they are stuck in this intellectual ivory tower where they assume that they know best for the people on the ground. And maybe they do. I question it, but maybe they do. But they don't have a clue how to connect with them. Just being right about policy doesn't get the job done anymore. I mean, did it ever? Maybe it got the job done more when it was obvious whose jobs you were protecting with that policy. But now that's disconnected. They just those parties haven't moved on. And Joe Biden has only won the election in the US. I think really the main factor was Donald Trump's mishandling of COVID. It wasn't because the Democrats inspired a groundswell. No,
I did find his speech pretty inspiring. But then you'd think that by his age as a politician, you should be able to, he's probably waited all his life to do that inaugural speech, and he did a pretty good job. But it's true to say that if Trump wasn't in power, if you didn't have such an unpopular and shot himself in the foot so much, if you didn't have that to fight against, maybe Joe Biden's personality and policy wouldn't have been enough. A more charismatic Republican might have been.
I still find it funny that he's president. The first time Joe Biden appeared on my radar, I'd come in from the ministry in London, and I was wrecked. Me and my mate were watching 24-hour news. Like, I find it funny.
Must have been wrecked.
Yeah. At the end of a night out, it's just funny. Somehow, when you're in a wonky state, you are more attuned to the journalistic cliche of the 24-hour news. And anyway, one of the stories that was looping was how Joe Biden had been rumbled for ripping off a speech made by Neil Kinnock in the mid-80s. And it showed this clip of Neil Kinnock saying something, which frankly wasn't really worth ripping off. And then it shows Joe Biden saying the very same thing in a Democrat rally. And then it shows him getting off a plane wearing sunglasses. And the journalist says, "So who is Joe Biden?" "A statesman." And in that moment, he looks like Larry David. It looks like something off Curb Your Enthusiasm. And this was looping and looping. And it just got funnier. And anyway, my point is that this was 2007, right? And even at that point, Joe Biden was seen as this old duffer, a political stooge, a statesman.
Yeah.
And 14 years later,
he's made it.
President of the USA.
Yeah.
That's where liberal-minded politics is. It is the land of political stooges, people who are good at being politicians and good at theory. They're the people at the top of these institutions. I mean, really?
Well, I watched recently the Have I Got News for You? It's the 30th year that it's still being aired, and both Ian and Paul spoke about Boris, when he was still just a journalist, and how his rise to political dominion, and it couldn't come from a better person than Ian Hislop, really. Just the kind of shock, and as much as he's very active on a journalistic level, he's got a sense of humor. He just kind of laughs it off. Like, how could that possibly have happened? But it has.
Yeah, they helped make it so. Boris Johnson's
Probably
appearances on Have I Got News for You really propelled him into the nation's psyche.
Yeah, we love a fool, don't we? Really, the Brits. They're kind of.
Yeah, I mean, God, I'm not even sure I want to talk about, but that's a whole other.
Let's not. It's not.
There's so much that we can say about him, but it's already been said, and largely hysterically it's been said. Yeah.
So talking about the left, okay, and I'm going to draw a link here to Russia because I've been, in researching a lot of these podcasts and talking to some people, a lot of politics about, how have we got to where we are, the erosion of, the communist regime in the late 80s, and China and democracy, and this sort of fallacy that we had. There was a degree of trust in the leadership. Obviously, in Russia, you don't have so much choice about that trust. You sort of, there's quite a dark layer of threat behind if you're on the wrong side of history, if you like. But you spent a short amount of time in Russia, and it was. Do you want to describe the letter that you received from Bakushistan? Was it, or?
Well, I mean, there's so much. There's so much. I used to get paid to tell this story.
I bet you did. I'm getting it for free.
Over an hour. It would be like presentation. The reason why I ended up there was to do with that stuffed fox that became a meme. And if people were to Google stoned fox, they'd see it. And they'd see the Fox that I had part ownership of for a time. The reason why I bought that Fox was nothing to do with Russia. It was the DJ Space Dimension controller. Saw it for sale on eBay, this demented looking Fox. He says, if anyone buys with this Fox, I'll DJ for them for free. My mate, Matt Tyson, in Carlisle, rung me up. He says, what do you think? I said, well, we should obviously buy it. Because I just knew in that moment, I didn't find the Fox funny, but I just thought, actually, we could have a bit of fun by calling his bluff. Because he didn't expect anyone to buy it. He was just posting it kind of rhetorically. But then when we actually bought it, he didn't believe us. Like, I left a message on his Facebook wall saying, be careful what you wish for, old boy, comment. Because I've just gone and bought the fucker, full stop. And he didn't believe me. And so eventually I had to meet him in Manchester Piccadilly Station. The Fox was in an Argos bag and he was crying with laughter. And when he realised that I was, a small part of the scene, and that my mate was a promoter, he said, well, I'll play 2 gigs for you. So I put him on to play in London and my mate put him on in Carlisle. And that would have been fine. That would have been the end of it as far as we were concerned. The Fox appeared in a Perspex case behind the decks, uplit, all good. It got in Mixmag, it got in The Guardian. We had a lot of fun with it. But then the image of that Fox went viral in Russia, completely unrelated to what we were doing. And in the end, there was a financial offer to take the Fox to Russia. But of course, I didn't have the Fox. It had been given to Space Venture Controller. So I borrowed it back from him. Went to Russia with the Fox with the artists who stuffed the Fox. And I mean, then there's the story that I was on for years.
It goes on.
Refer to,
yes.
Was purporting to be from the Russian embassy. No, the embassy of Bashkortostan.
Bashkortostan, it doesn't have sovereignty, but it's
saying that they wanted to use the Fox in an advertising campaign to do with sanitary napkins. And it was written on quite a plausibly diplomatic paper.
It does look real. I mean, yeah.
And to think that I opened this on Christmas Day with the family in the family home in the northeast of England, the timing couldn't have been better. I thought maybe it's something from my Aunt Celia or something, and I opened it. And the look on my face, I just handed it to my brother. What? And we all read it, and we weren't certain whether it was real or fake. And I think on balance, in the end, I think it was fake. But the fact that I even thought that it might be real, I went to the Russian embassy in London a few days later. How do you explain that on the intercom?
Yeah,
I tried. They let me in. And there was this whole thing, like this guy came out, and then he gets another one, and there's 3 people who worked in the Russian embassy, one of whom was definitely like a proper diplomat. 2 of them were wearing flat caps. Is this what Russian diplomats wear indoors?
What was it a tartan flat cap? Because that's
yes, it was.
Was it? Yeah.
But it wasn't like a garish red.
Yeah, I know the sort.
It was a more subtle, like mottled, moss coloured tartan. Anyway, and they're there with this letter, and there's this whole set to. And in the end, he says, whoever signed the letter does not work here. But if you have a proposal with your Fox, you can have a meeting with my boss. And this guy was an assistant to the ambassador. So even with a fake, with a letter they reckon was fake, talked about a stuffed fox and sanitary napkins. He thinks this fox is quite interesting, and maybe I should send a proposal to the ambassador.
I know. How bored? I mean, surely they've got bigger foxes to fry. I mean,
indeed. You know, and that is just one tangent. There's about 15 other things like that I could tell you about that fox. You know, Calvin Harris's involvement, Fatboy Slim, how it ended up with Fatboy Slim, and he tried to he ambushed Calvin Harris with it, put it in his drinks fridge, and left a note, and it scared Calvin Harris. Tweeted about it a couple of weeks ago, but beforehand, and I thought, right, how can I? And I replied to Calvin Harris, yeah, he's actually in my bedroom in Preston. And he replied saying, haha, you're not serious. I thought, I'll get you. And I got to him fortuitously. And then it went missing, and it ended up in Hull. And I went to collect it, and it was in my backpack. And I had to report on a darts qualifying tournament, just incidentally, in Hull. So there I was with a fox in my backpack, and I'm watching like Ted Hankey, Andy Fordham. And then the biggest darts player, female darts player, walks past. She's Russian, Anastasia Dobromislova.
Wow.
Fox is in my, she'd know the fox, because it was massive in Russia. It was the biggest meme in Russia that year. And that was a year of Gangnam Style, but this was bigger. This out-trended Gangnam Style on Twitter.
That's insane. Yeah.
And there it was in my backpack, and Anastasia Dobromislova was standing next to me. I thought, should I? I thought, no. That's it. The fox has already done all of this. I'm done with it. So I thought that would be, that was the end. But no, then I get all of these letters about it, and go to the Russian embassy, and still people put things on my wall saying, oh, there's the fox. And it actually got quite big again in Russia a couple of years ago. Someone in politics used it as part of the campaign. But back to the more serious conversation we were having. My time out there gave me an education in what's really going on in Russia.
Yeah.
And the absurdity of this phony war. The Western perception of how Russia rolls and how it actually rolls, and the difference between Putin's official iron fist and his dark side and people disappearing in the night KGB style, which is true, that does happen. But we wrongly assume in the West that that's how the whole of Russia is, and it isn't. The real power in Moscow and St. Petersburg is not Putin. It's actually quite liberal-minded. There's a lot of super rich elites there that are very worldly and very tolerant, and more so than the average rich capitalist in London. And they just living in their own society, really. Because communism fell in such a quick and extreme and farcical fashion, big power vacuums suddenly occurred. The link between the Kremlin and the cities was broken. And suddenly these vacuums were filled with all sorts of people that, some of them are local politicians, but the police, local club promoters, whatever, they're all quite pally with each other, and they kind of live by their own rules. And I think Putin kind of knows this, but decides not to mess with them. And he metes out his very extreme form of power to those who he can touch. But there's a heck of a lot who have nothing to do with him. The educated people in Russia, the equivalent Guardian readers, let's say, they couldn't care less about demonstrating against Putin. They run their own society, really.
Yeah, and I'd assume, I mean, knowing a bit about Putin and how he came to power, albeit, if we could go back and talk about, Yeltsin and stuff like that, but he probably is intelligent enough to realize that if he starts to mess around with the lifestyles and the rights of people with that much money and that sort of, like you say, the liberal upper middle class or the very rich, then it's just going to shoot himself in the foot. So he lets them get away with it, and he doesn't, there isn't communist rule there anymore, but there's still, he can't really sort of completely delete his sentiments, where he comes from about sort of being a manipulator and being in control.
He is a master tactician.
Yeah.
Right? Think Alf Ramsey when he pioneered the 4-4-2. George Graham with his offside trap, right?
Brian Clough,
right? He is a tactical genius. So even though technically Russia is capitalist, he manages to get, most of Putin's action is driven towards appealing to the less educated who hanker after the power of communism.
Yeah.
So they want their cake and eating it. They want to have their cake and eat it. So they miss the days when they felt Russia was like a massive global force, and they miss the communist might. So Putin appears to stand for that. Now, how so? Well, what he does, he irritates the West sufficiently, like an annoying little brother. He plays these genius little masterstrokes that the West think are threats to them, right? So he annexes Crimea, but why does he pick Crimea to invade? Oh, because 80 or 90% of people in Crimea consider themselves Russian anyway. So they're not going to fight back. But the West, because it suits their fucking narrative as well, by the way, the West think, it means it's more likely to invade.
Yeah.
Right, let's buy some more nuclear weapons and let's prattle on in Parliament about how we're going to stand up to Putin. And then Putin, to his people, suddenly his people see that Obama's angry, that NATO is mobilizing itself. They see talk of sanctions. And suddenly Putin looks strong.
Yeah.
Because he's been given credence by the West. Now, this sounds terribly patronizing to Russians, but it's true. There are, and I'm talking about, and there are educated, very educated, rich, successful Russians who I became friends with there. They have an element of insecurity that people in the UK do not. They are so interested in how Britain perceives them. We don't care what Russia think of us. The average Joe in the UK couldn't give two shits. So there's something in the Russian psyche that actually wants advocation from the West. And Putin knows this. His foreign policy, it's all about getting the credence. It's all about sitting on the table playing the war games, when in reality, they're not actually doing that much.
No, it's a spin, isn't it? A lot. Yeah.
He's an absolute master. And the West, so set in their ways, so stuck in the 1960s and the 1970s. They just don't see it for what it is. They don't see the fact that having NATO still to protect themselves from the Russian threat, it's so archaic. It made sense when after Hitler, sort of part of that vacuum was filled up by communism, and the communist state wanted to grow by taking over Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, Hungary. East Germany, places they weren't welcome. And so, yeah, if they could have done, they'd have probably taken over England. But Putin can't be asked. He cannot be asked, but we think that he can. Yeah. Well, I don't think that they can, but we still think that the Russians are coming.
There's a risk, yeah. There's that. Well, you talk about like the Russian psyche, well, the British psyche, like, you know, that they don't care what Russia thinks of them, but they have this this thread of anxiety and insecurity about KGB, about Russian spies, you know, James Bond's, or, you know, that kind of archetype of that we could be brought down at any moment. So we've got to watch out for those Russians. And
heaven defend the Chinese.
Yes.
You know, like no, we can't have them selling the technology to us.
Those phones, those
spying on us. Like they're not already spying on us, and like we're not spying on them.
Yeah.
No, it is certainly true that there is in the Russian psyche and the Chinese psyche and in communist ideology, there is more of an emphasis on the control of the lay person. That is true. You know, there is more surveillance, I think. That is all true, but not to the. But that is not the same thing as they're going to take over the world, and we need to protect ourselves by building loads of nuclear weapons in Barrow. You know, God knows how much we pay out each year to whoever it is building these things, and they're rubbish. Our nuclear weapons are absolute dog shit, like compared to what the USA have got, and probably compared to what warlords across the Middle East have got that have been buying them second hand. You know, our nuclear deterrent is an absolute joke, and yet we still put millions into it every year.
British aerospace,
74.
Yeah, I think there's an element of you know, I remember you go on like school trips to France and things like that, and there were shops that you could buy knives and pistols and things like that in. So like the nuclear weapons and the sort of international military defense market is full of nations who just go into it and just want to buy those things because to be seen to have them in their armaments, you know.
Yeah. And you know, pretty much the only good thing Donald Trump did was say to Kim Jong-un, right, come on, launch your nukes then.
Yeah,
if you think you have enough. Like, by him subverting 50 years of diplomacy, like the yes minister, you can't say that something. By him just ignoring all of that, he showed what absolute nonsense the whole arms race is, you know, because guess what? Kim Jong-un didn't launch those weapons.
No.
You know, and loads of friends of mine were earnestly telling me, you know, the world's a lot more dangerous now. I'm telling you, I'm not just saying this after the event. I said, no, it isn't, you idiots. It's not going to be nuclear war. What Donald Trump has just done is proven how pointless North Korea's nuclear arsenal is, because he's antagonizing them. He won't launch them, and I bet they'll be talking. And guess what? Arbitrarily, they arranged a meeting and sat around the table, and there was no nuclear war.
There was no resolution. There was a big black sort of folder that they both signed, and everyone thought it's a historical moment.
There was no resolution, but in my mind, there was progress. The fact that the nuclear weapons were not launched, and it was just, and you know, you've got two absolute swines there, you know, playing with their toys, but not even they played with the nuclear weapons.
No.
You know, but people's thinking, you know, I'm talking a lot about political systems being stuck in the dark ages, but I think, to be honest, the people get the political systems they deserve. And I'm not saying that every person deserves it, but people's minds are stuck in these old loops, these old arguments.
Yeah.
You've got these, lefties in our Facebook feeds that preach about equality. They earnestly say how much they stick up for black people, and oh, isn't it awful that such and such has happened, that there are so many white DJs nowadays,
Oh, has that been said, really?
Oh, God, mate. So
I don't know where that's come from.
I could talk for a long time about the disgraceful narrative at the moment about how house music is now too white.
Wow.
But yeah, the original point. But as soon as it comes to China or Russia, suddenly they're not looking for the nuances. They're burning the witches. They're saying, oh, but the Chinese though, they're not. I think that Great Britain saying that we're not going to have a company build our 5G infrastructure because the Chinese. I'd say that's pretty racist. I'd say that's tarring. That's the tarring of a brush. Now, obviously, it is a more complex equation than that, but it's the fact that the burden of proof for racism is basically is in itself biased by what's in fashion at the moment. So people will say, well, Paul Ince hasn't had a managerial job for a few years, or like a couple of years, and he got sacked a bit quickly from Blackburn. Oh, that's racist, right? That's enough for them, because there are not very many black managers in the Premier League. They'll say, well, isn't this terrible? Isn't this terrible? They won't look for the nuances. They won't say, well, how many black managers actually applied for the job? How many? They won't look for any counter evidence like that to come to the conclusion.
Yeah.
But if I post on Facebook, and I did, saying I think it's racist that we're saying we're not going to deal with a Chinese company, loads of people replied saying, oh, but what about Chinese human rights record? All of these nuances. They cited various other bits of evidence that suggested that my argument was a bit binary. Yeah, when it suits you, you'll look at other evidence. When Ryan Sterling hasn't told you something, you'll look at other evidence.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Is that I mean, that's one of the features, I think, today of any kind of debate or conversation through online channels is everyone has their own publishing platform now. And obviously you're going to have a diversity of intelligence and bigotry and motive and those sort of things. A lot of dots are being joined to suit a narrative, which is very easily influenced by other factors, and the nuances are the things that should dismantle that narrative and make all narratives kind of they're subject to objectivism, and they can be dismantled to an extent. One of the things that I see happening is subconsciously, I think, a lack of trust in traditional systems. You look at what happened with Brexit, and it was a harping back to the empirical power of Britain. And that was a very easy button to push, and surprisingly easy. But why would it be so easy now? And my theory is that because there's a void, if you like, for want of a better word, of a faith and a trust in the system. So in its place, people construct or adopt or jump on the back of narratives that give them something that they can believe in, even if it is hypocritical, or it can be easily disproven. They don't care.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you're outlining has been going on since time immemorial. It just rears its head more vociferously at certain points in the cycle, and at the moment we're at peak hysteria and distrust. But if you think of what Britain was when we were kids, there wasn't that much trust for Margaret Thatcher once you got north of Nottingham.
Yeah.
Anywhere industrial, there was a serious distrust. Things like the Hillsborough disaster, scandals about Orgreave, miners' strikes, things like that. There was a legitimate distrust. But of course, because the distrust cut both ways, I think because both sides had too much distrust for the other, you get entrenchment. Margaret Thatcher, and the Tory government, their opinions of what the industrial North was were pretty primitive. They're like, these little people. But similarly, the people in the Northeast, a lot of them they don't trust people who wear a tie. They have their prejudices as well. Obviously, I'm on the side of the miners in this, because of where I grew up. But the fact is, on both sides of a debate, when there's so much distrust on both sides, you get absolute shenanigans, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I witnessed it in growing up in Southeast London. It was I think it was in the 80s. Is it the SDP took over Rosie someone? Anyway, I think her child went to one of my primary schools, and it was pretty much a Labour constituency. But you had a huge divide in the borough of Greenwich between the poverty line, the real working class, and the incredibly rich, and they would be side by side, as they are often in London. And that creates, like it does, conflict. The feelings of the haves not really needing the have-nots, and they're a bit of a nuisance, and the have-nots resenting the haves and saying, but what about us? But you see that develop over my lifetime, and there's been a bit of a broadening of the middle class, but there's never really been a resolution between those two sides. And I guess that's kind of natural. I mean, the welfare state is what it is, and democracy is what it is. It doesn't necessarily purport to be able to solve the complex dilemma of living amongst each other and sharing ideals or sharing progress.
I think it's natural, but it's stoked by do-gooder activists who don't think that the key to progress and equality and fairness, what they should be thinking is, how can we better understand each other, as opposed to how can we favour people who we decide to favour?
Right.
So much activism is about this side needs to win now, okay? And I'm going to tell you again tomorrow and the day after and the day after. When in fact, actually, you're shifting the prejudice somewhere else. You're shifting whatever existing biases were, and you're just being just as biased, but in another direction. The real prize in making change that actually is sustainable is you reduce how vociferous you are about that change. You reduce how keen you are to show how big a problem is. And you look at the solution and think, right, what's the solution here? You just calm it down a bit. You make half of your conversation about the problem and half of it about the solution. And within that, you try and understand the people who aren't doing what you want to do. Like, why aren't the Conservative government speaking for these people? You try and understand people who went to Eton, right? You don't say, oh, Boris Johnson, he went to Eton, posh so-and-so, isn't it awful?
I do actually say that sometimes.
Yeah, well, you shouldn't, because you wouldn't say that about a black person, would you? You wouldn't say, oh, damn them coming over from Jamaica. You wouldn't say that. Of course you wouldn't.
I wouldn't, but
quite right.
yeah, but you know, when you've come up against that sort of subsector of the aristocracy, you do lose a bit of respect, I guess, for them and what they represent. In the same way that I don't feel the same way. I mean, a black person is a very generalistic term, and someone from Eton is quite specific. But I see what you're getting at.
Still not specific enough for my liking.
Yeah, right. You know, which Eton boy?
You know, you can say, but it isn't. It's a pretty broad brushstroke. Even worse, using the word posh or using the word rich. You know, all sides understanding each other better.
Yeah,
it will result in more equality, as opposed to just deciding to promote a certain aspect of it. You know, activism gets stuck on the outlining of a problem and why something is so bad. You know, yeah, we need that. We need to show it as a problem to raise some awareness. But then once you've done that, that's kind of that's kind of like what blasts down the door is the activism, the stuff that people share on social media, the demonstrations, the hashtag. But what do you do when you walk through that door? And hardly anyone dedicates time to that.
Yeah, it's about the winning of the battle, not the rebuilding of the battlefield. Yeah.
And it really, and what makes it annoying to me particularly is how people purport to be these moral guardians. Oh, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. And actually, when you start talking to them about the substance of what they stand for, they don't really know very much. They don't know about the solution. You know, even with quite friendly questioning. Loads of my friends are like this, by the way. You know, some of my best friends are like that. You know, the way they approach politics and the way they approach change, I just think most of the time you're just taking an opinion that you think you should take because of your preconceptions that you should be against racism and you should be pro-equality and blah, 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 like that. And most of their preconceptions I agree with, like what you should be. But then when they make their arguments, that it's just jumping on the bandwagon. It's just, the Tories are bastards. All right, yeah, thanks. Like, yeah, that's really going to make change, isn't it? That really worked in the last election, didn't it? You know, you see, I told you they were wrong uns. Oh, yeah, cheers.
Yeah.
Now, I don't mind people who are not politically active. People don't have time, right?
Yeah,
you know, go down the pub, talk to someone. He says, yeah, you know, that Boris Johnson's a bit of a twat. But if they're not engaged in politics, I'm not going to start questioning them about what they stand for and what they mean. I'm all right with that. But it's the people who pretend to be making change, right? Who are in, you know, just in their ivory towers, getting their 50 likes on Facebook, sharing that Guardian article. If they use that time to actually just dial it back a bit and understand who they're protesting against and the complexity of the issues, and maybe actually do something, maybe volunteer towards a cause. Those who have time to pontificate about it, well, what if they use some of that pontificating time to actually do something?
Yeah.
And you could say, well, what am I doing? Not that much, to be fair. And I have been pontificating for the last hour. But I don't take to Facebook purporting to be making change.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I don't say how rotten the system is on Facebook. I don't share all of these articles about it saying, oh, isn't it awful? Isn't it awful? Isn't it awful? I'm not doing that. I'm doing that now because we're on the topic and I'm off on one. But,
and, you know, and you're free to be that way as well.
Yes, indeed.
You've been given the platform.
one day I will actually do something. One day I will be part of a cooperative, probably something to do with housing in London, areas that I know about. You know, maybe something to do with people exchanging their creative work for accommodation, something like that. One day I'll actually do it. Not yet, but I'll do it.
Can I pause you just there? Are you right to take a little 5-minute break?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So you just mentioned, Mike, about perhaps you will make a difference in the future. Something to do with, you know, housing. Do you know what happens if you type in Mike Boorman into Google?
Ah, yes, I do. Mike Boorman, real estate.
Real estate. And let me just tell you, the realtor. Okay. Yeah. Now, I'm going to try and find what it says about Mike Boorman, because I think it's got, you know, it's pretty accurate description of you, really. There's a link on it that says meet Mike. And the first line says integrity, trustworthiness, honesty, knowledge, and expertise. What do you say about that?
I'm better than an estate agent, right? So yeah, I used to work in the property game, but it was a property investment firm. You know, I was in the city for a bit, and it was some of it was at first it was PR and little marketing bits and pieces, but then it was actually doing the deals, and trying to making the numbers work, and then it was in investor reporting. So me putting into words what the numbers meant in these big property deals. So yeah, I ain't no estate agent.
No. Well, yeah, I mean, you've got quite a varied experience, haven't you? I mean, let's focus on a bit of music, shall we?
Let's.
Yeah, because you're in the process. I mean, we've seen quite a lot of each other at lockdown. You were over here for Christmas, and we've met up before the restrictions. We were trying to sort out some administration stuff, and you were moving house. You had that funny little flat in Figuerettas with the extradited French criminal owner. But
Porter, yeah.
Maybe we'll come back to that. But you are also in the process of making an album.
I am, yeah. And I'm taking on a musical persona called Distorted Narrative. You know, and given the first hour of this interview, I was basically talking about various distorted narratives about Russia, about race, about the Labour Party, you know, etc. It took me a long time to thinking about this, but I thought, well, how can I get across my chat at an after party, right? The stuff that I might come out with that's sort of satirical or stupid, you know, about sports or politics or the news. How can I package that in music?
I'm not sure I've heard anything quite like that before as well.
I mean, there are, yeah. I mean, there won't be, when you hear it, yeah, there won't be anything that has the take on it that I do. But people using narratives, you know, using a lot of spoken word and saying things that are slightly provocative. That happens.
Is there a lot of lyrics on your album? Or are there a lot of lyrics?
It depends on the song. So the first 3 that I've done, they don't have that many words in them, but the words do repeat quite a bit. And 2 of them have my voice, but quite distorted. So distorted narrative is obviously having a go at media narratives, but it's also a convenient way just for me to use my voice and distort it a bit. So it gives me the license to just be a bit stupid with it as well.
That's quite fun, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it is, like just me sitting on my own recording like stupid faux accents. There's so many, I won't be able to get away with a lot of it, but there's certain bits of it that are still authentically me holding court, being stupid, but I can get away with it. If you distort it enough and people are, did he say that? What is that? And the song titles, for example, are another way that I can put my voice there, but without being a poet or Jim Morrison. I just look like a cunt if it was just me talking all the time. If it was basically what I've been telling you now over music, that's too much.
Yes. Yeah. You'd be like the antithesis of a Billy Bragg.
Yeah. That just wouldn't work. I need to be a bit more obscure with it. And the sound palette is basically sort of tribal, psychedelic, melodic house, varying tempos from 80 up to 130. But really, the difference between everything in the sound palette is simply the vocals and the voice I'm going to use to carry it. In that world that I talk about, there's a lot of ethnic vocals or a lot of quite profound female vocals. I'm going up yours to that, but I think I'm going to be able to get away with it. I'm going to be using some ethnic instruments and a sort of a style of mix down and master that is quite, psychedelic. I mean, what is a psychedelic style of mix down and master? Well, by that I mean
like kind of a sort of unpredictable, I suppose, would be one word.
Sort of a live, loose sound that isn't compressed to yin yang, right? Yeah. It's not clinical. Yeah, the drums and the bass pump a little bit, but just enough for an indoor club system. But in reality, this stuff is best served as the light is fading outside at Cover Santa or Las Dalias or another festival around the world that sort of, I call it the Burning Man trickle down scene. It's quite big in the Middle East. There's a lot in South Africa, and there's this whole sort of DJ culture that I didn't even know about until a few years ago. And it really was an amazing discovery. Like I went to Noisily Festival in Leicestershire. And there was only two DJs on that I'd heard of. One of them was Dave Seaman. I can't remember who the other one was. And I thought, well, who are these people? And I was just blown away. It was kind of like a bit like, it's kind of where progressive house has gone, mixed with a hippified sound. And the kind of crowd that this attracts, they're very culturally switched on, but they're not anoraks of the music. It's not what I was used to in a more house-led world. Like,
do you think that there are echoes back to acid house? I mean, I know acid house as a culture really kind of sprung out of the UK and from London, and within that, obviously, there's like limits to how culturally diverse it could become. But the people that were going to the free parties and that were part of the scene had their own little sidelines, which might be creative, might not, but they were part of the collective rather than DJ and dance floor. That Burning Man has created a society, if you like, that can, because through their influence and their success, they can create other opportunities to do similar sort of parties.
It feels like more of a collective thing. But by the way, even if it didn't, I'd be into it because the sound is what I'd been looking for. So when I started producing music, I was up at 125, 126 BPM. And each time I'd finish a track, I'd think, God, who would actually play this slow? Maybe Nick Warren. And in my mind, I thought the only way I can get away with melodic, live sounding instruments. And again, I go back to the mix down and master style, which is not very clinical, live, loose. I thought the only way I can get away with being like that is down tempo, Balearic.
Yeah.
So then I went Balearic, basically. I thought, right, well, my future in this scene has to be at lower tempos. And so then the next music I produced was much slower, because I thought this is the only home for live sounding instruments and ethnic instruments as well. I was into ethnic instruments from the beginning, not realizing how done to death they had been in another part of the scene. I just hadn't noticed, I just didn't know. And I went to this festival and I met some absolutely legendary people as well. And they invited me to play at their little festival also. And they became like a really good crew of people who I'd go out partying with in London before I moved to Ibiza. And yeah, I guess I'm trying to break into that scene. All of my previous stuff, and it's not like I'm a decorated producer here, I've only been signed to a few labels. I DJ at the odd good venue in Ibiza, but nothing really.
Quite modest of you, but yeah.
You what?
I think that's quite modest of you.
Thank you. I'm not known for my modesty, but I'll take it. But yeah, I'm leaving that behind, and I want to get into an up-tempo, more psychedelic clubland, but doing it with an album that says something.
Yeah,
that is still me, because you can look at some elements of that side of the scene that I want to progress in and say, well, is that really me? You can look at do I look like a hippie? No. Do I talk like a hippie? No. Are my ideologies like a hippie? Some of them, some not. But do I dress like one? No. But I'm quite open-minded musically. The music I like is quite similar to what these people like.
Yeah.
And in that part of the scene, you don't really need a photo of me looking earnest by a load of graffiti on a bridge. You don't need that precise, clinical. You don't need to be cool like that, like in a conventional way. Yeah. And so I think I can actually be myself with the whole distorted narrative thing. I think I can create an interesting persona with it, with social commentaries and also just really funny stuff behind this mask of distorted narrative. And then eventually I will unmask myself and it will be more, just me.
Yeah, in a sense, you might have already done that, but
yeah, maybe. But it's like, this isn't some grand unveiling. Though,
yeah, I know.
I will be producing music as distorted narrative for a fair period of time. Hopefully I'll get on a decent label with it and I'll be off and running.
I'm sure you will. I think it's a really interesting project, and I wanted to talk a bit about you mentioned a few sort of DJ gigs you've been doing in Ibiza. You played at my party a couple of times, and I think you're probably up on one of those posters up there. And you were doing the sunsets at La Torre, which is right near where I lived when I first moved to Ibiza, and it was run by an Ibizenko family, and it had a reputation for basically one of the greatest sunsets in Ibiza. And you had the privilege of playing there on a number of occasions because you work closely with Pete Gooding.
Yeah.
Pete was doing the programming. So just tell us a little bit about those gigs. And I went to a couple of your sets there. Your sets are always very varied. You can tell that you've got a real depth of knowledge about music and a real sensitivity about the order, the timing, the tracks themselves, and that for me is what sort of defines a Balearic DJ, if you like. What we aspire to be is people that are not easily pigeonholed, that we can show off a bit and stroke our beard at, like, look how clever we are playing this. But the bottom line is to create an atmospheric musical atmosphere, an atmospheric atmosphere, you know what I mean? Something slightly spiritual, something inspiring, something that reaches people so that they can just listen and then just enjoy the scenery. So how did you find those things?
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And the Torre is like, that's only about 20% of me. You know, the shackles are on there. You know, I know that there's a lot of stuff I can't play there that I really want to. Essentially, you're DJing to the weather there, which is a whole, which is that's a skill I just didn't really think about much until I actually had to do it. I mean, you'll know all about that.
I can tell you a few stories about that. Yeah. I mean, I used to play at the Sunset Ashram. We'd invite guests down as well, but I'd often play for quite a few hours. And I remember obviously the high season, the summer nights would go on. But you get to September and people would be sitting around, the sun would go down earlier, get a bit cooler, the wind would come in. And the owner, in his infinite wisdom, had created these lampshades that were kind of out of the sort of plastic shell material, lots of little discs of them. So when the wind rushed through, they created this absolute racket, like, and they're right in the middle of each table of people eating. And also we've got these ancient, huge speakers that he'd never change. We brought our own sound system eventually, but it was just an assault on their senses. And I felt a little bit guilty, kind of, you'd almost be like, they should close the bar. Like, it's not a nice place to be. It's really windy, it's cold, but you've got to play the music to try to cut through that.
Yeah. It's it can be pretty thankless. You know, you're there for 4 hours, 5 hours sometimes at the Torre, and you might not get any feedback, or you might have one conversation. Like, I'd say the average would be maybe 2 conversations per night. Sometimes there's just nights where you feel like you can do no wrong, when in reality you just kind of, okay, you might have played a good set, but it just happens to be the people that are there, what mood they're in, how merry they are, and how willing they are to come up to speak to you. But my point is about thankless is that you don't get that energy that you would get from a dance floor. And also, they're not all on drugs. In fact, very few of them are, if any. And so they're eating, they're having their dinner.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, at La Torre, you're keeping the car on the road rather than really ragging it. You're not looking to set fast to slap, right? You have to conform much more to the circumstances, and there's a level that you just can't cross. You'll get fired, And I pushed it a couple of times, and I've nearly been fired a couple of times.
Yeah. I heard those stories, and of course we've recently lost one of your colleagues there, Jose Padilla.
Yeah, I mean, yes, indeed. I mean, I guess that anybody like me who ends up DJing at Hostel La Torre or somewhere like that, Pikes, we do owe people like Jose Padilla and Alfredo a bit, because they made it okay to be eclectic. they sort of set a certain tone for sunset DJing, which had twists of comedy in. And did he just play that? And these moments of pop. By the way, I can't really do that at the Torre. I mean, they can, because they've earned the right to. But I can't really put on the comedy at the Torre. I can do that at Pike's for sure, you know. But so, you know, yeah. I mean, it's there's a misconception about Balearic DJing that it's chill out, and some of it is for sure. As discussed, it's a restaurant. There's an ambience. We don't want to intrude too much. So yeah, the music isn't pumping very often. But it's much more than that. But you know, to say a Balearic sound, to me, a Balearic sound is an accumulation of different genres in a DJ set. It isn't one song, you know.
It can't be represented by one style or one song. I think that's what appeals to certainly a lot of the DJs that I've met over the years who really cherish those moments of playing a sunset. It's been worked into since those days of Padilla in the early 90s. It's been worked into the psyche of a DJ that has a broad taste and wants to play that symphony to the sun. And within that, there's lots of diversity, and then it can become a bit competitive for some as well. You know, the crate digging mentality of the Balearic DJ, that they're seeking, they want to play classics, they want to allude to classics, but they also would love to be the first person to play something that everyone else turns their head and says, what was that, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And you know, I have a lot of respect for people like you, people like Phil Cooper, who are absolute prolific collectors of music, that play a lot of new music that sounds old.
Yes.
Like, that captures that vibe, that kind of, the parameters were sort of drawn in the mid to late 80s. And yeah, the parameters move a little bit, but not that much. And the amount of times I'll listen to Phil Cooper's radio shows and I'll think, oh, that's perfect for the Torre, that track. And I'll Shazam it and assume that, this is probably 89. I could imagine, I don't know, Phil Mason probably played it at Cafe Del Mar. And then I look at it and it's from 2020. Like, oh, Phil does it again.
Yeah.
You know, but it's in one of the first points you made about my DJing. You know, you said I had a depth of music. Actually, I don't have as big a depth of music as it looks like. But the order that I put it in, and this sort of the plan of it builds this idea that I'm this anorak vinyl head, and I'm not. You know.
No. But do you find that you construct sets then? I mean, are you less of an instinctive improviser? I mean, one of the things about DJing regularly, and certainly if you're doing something like La Torre every week or Sunset Ashram every week, I mean, I always feel like I have to play a completely new 6 hours of music, even though I know the people the previous week weren't there. And that's a pressure I put on myself. And I don't plan a lot. Do you find yourself planning sets and going into gigs like
I plan ready? A lot, but with the criteria that a lot of this is going to have to be new-ish.
Yeah.
So a lot of my eclecticism comes from being very aware of what my collection is and having it filed, as opposed to having the sheer huge numbers in the collection. And the end result sounds pretty similar, I think, to someone that would have I mean, your musical collection, I'm going to guess, probably not an exaggeration to say it could be up to 10 times bigger than mine. I mean, I haven't counted what your collection is, but just knowing how each one of us operates. But you wouldn't necessarily know it by hearing a 5-hour sunset set from me and from you. So I militarily file this stuff. And in terms of the planning of my sets, the improvisation comes in which batches of things I add together. So the whole set is seldom planned. I mean, planning a whole 5-hour set is lunacy, really.
It is, yeah.
Especially weather. You're DJing to the weather, remember. You know, I cannot overstate the importance of that, of where the clouds are in the sky in relation to the sun. That's a really big thing. And you have to adjust sometimes in seconds. You think the sun, you know, you think you've got a clear sunset and it's going to disappear in 5 minutes time. And then there's this wispy cloud on the horizon that you couldn't tell. And you're like, oh, bugger, the sun's actually going to disappear in 2 minutes. So even planning a sunset, even just planning the 3 tunes before and after sunset can be pretty fraught. But, you know, if you see me DJ at the Torre or for you or at Pike's, you know, it's an addition of pre-planned batches of things a lot of the time. And yeah, there's some stuff I just think, right, I'm going to play that now. But that then leads me to a batch.
Right. So they're in little groups that work together. I think that's, it's a little bit how I used to plan my CD wallet. So that I could go into one part of it and then I know that various CDs I can pick out of, because you've got to play. It was before the days that you could just play one USB and link the decks and stuff. You'd have to have another CD basically. I mean, in terms of planning, I know exactly that experience. I was playing at a hotel called Amare 3 times a week, playing the sunset. And it was a contractual obligation to play the hotel's signature tune just as the sun was dropping into the sea. And it was about 1:13. It was an atrocious piece of music. It still haunts me. So it meant that every, you know, for an hour and a half or an hour, I'd build up to this. And then I had to play this tune. But obviously, at certain times, I know that the sun isn't actually going to hit the sea because there's clouds in front. So when do I start playing it? But that wouldn't matter if the hotel didn't have its own sort of Gestapo. And this guy with a clipboard would come back every night and just make sure I played it. You know, I started to play around with it for a bit, and then obviously, predictably, I got kind of pissed off by it. But
then the horse's head on the pillow arrived.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, a trap door I had for it. But I mean, so in terms of little batches and playing, I mean, it's a similar level. Can I draw the comparison to snooker, which is a big love of yours? You know, you play
on in the background as we speak.
It's on in the background. You play 6 shots ahead, don't you? You know. So that
actually, I don't.
You don't know.
I'm quite a slow player, and you will agree that in the games that you and I have played, that I'm good. I'm better tactically than I am at potting. But actually, my mind cannot really compute more than a couple of shots ahead. It resets itself. I'm a really slow chess player, so it's weird. Like I build a lot of things in life like it's a database. A lot of my creative things, it's like I'm building a spreadsheet, but I can't actually hold that much in my mind at any one time. It just resets. Like when I'm on the phone giving my password for my credit card or my bank or whatever, it's 9 letters. They'll ask me, you know, what's the 3rd and what's the 5th letter, and I have to count from 1.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll say at the other end, "Are you still there?" So I can tell that there's something abnormal about that I'm a little bit thick in one part of this equation, but within the tunnel that I've created, I'm a real planner. But it's just that the plan often isn't that wide. But I'm really conscious of what it is that I am doing.
Yeah, I think that's probably why you have like architects and builders. You know, there's a macro understanding of things. I think I'm particularly like that as well. I love a spreadsheet. It helps me organize the data in my head, and it makes me realize that I don't have to remember it all. If there's a spreadsheet or a list or some other way of categorizing it, I just think, oh, okay, I've come up with the system. I know it's going to fall into that, but I do still have to count my password out as well, even though I know it.
Yeah. I'm good with organizing data. You know, I do the stock market, but I'm not actually very good at maths. My basic arithmetic isn't that good. And I'm constantly making terrible mistakes. Like I've built this complex thing that's taken months. Like it's not, as far as data management goes, it's beautiful. And then, but then I'll waste an afternoon, like thinking that something is the case based on a really stupid mistake, like that I've added 230 to 20 instead of subtracted it. And then the whole afternoon of analysis, I realize, got to do that again. God, I'm stupid. But then I think, oh no, hang on a minute. At least I did build this.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it takes some to do that, you know. How's that going as well? I mean, are you noticing any specific trends in this economic crash that we're going through?
Well, I mean, is it a crash? That's the thing. Well, it was a crash last year, but now, now
I don't know.
Now the US market, I think I'm right in saying that. I mean, that's the market that I trade on with my bots. I think it's at a higher value than it was in early 2020. I mean, that ain't gonna last. There'll be another crash surely. So what am I noticing? I'm noticing just on average, the mean average level of absurdity has increased year on year. Now, last year you might say, well, fair enough, that there was a virus, and you know, every 10 years that there's something that sends the markets over the edge and there's a big crash, and that is true. But the level of volatility, certainly in the US market, and I suspect this is reflected in the UK or in the FTSE also, the volatility in 2019 and 2018 was significantly more than it was in nearly all of the years that led up to it, if not all. All of the 10 years. You know, the system that I've got has data that goes back until about 2000, 2001.
Okay.
So there's definitely there's more volatility, and you know, why is that? Well, I suppose Trump's trade war with China was definitely a lot of the reason why there was big volatility in 2019. But the thing is, it's a bit like football punditry and political punditry. I'm going back to distorted narratives again. But, you know, people who talk about the markets in the media, you know, after the event, they'll categorically say, well, it was such and such after the event. And you look at these same people, what they were saying in their columns the day before there's going to be a news announcement, and they know fuck all. Like their predictions are horrendous. But after the event, they'll create this narrative, and they'll say, well, the markets were volatile because, of course, well, it's the Trump war with China. So the very same entity, like Trump war with China, can explain the market going up just as much as it can explain the market going down, right?
Yeah.
It's used, it's cited for both things. US election, same thing. You know, well, it's the US election. Okay, but it went down today. Is that also because of the US elections? Yes, it is. Right, okay, fine. But I do think it's fair enough to say that the increase in volatility in the market is partly linked to the gradual erosion of capitalism.
Yeah.
It's not a binary thing that whatever the next crash is means that it's the fall of capitalism. No, it doesn't. But yeah, I just think gradually that all these tenets, all of these pillars of assumption about what this system is and these systems are, yeah, they are being challenged. And how is it going for me? It's going all right. You know, it's profitable. The system that I created, it was in about March last year. I stood it down because it became too chaotic. But I now know what to do if that chaos happens again. I've built safety mechanisms into the bots where if the market is at a certain level of volatility, the bots switch themselves off. They just don't trade.
Really? It's quite a funny little thought that if it gets too chaotic, they just just turn up.
Yeah, leave the table. Yeah, and I've defined the chaos in maths basically. You know, if something is above 38, right? If that's something I won't go into. It's like an economic measure. But that's all in the code. But yeah, it's profitable, but it's annoyingly profitable. And how can something be annoyingly profitable? Well, it makes enough money to be profitable, but I don't trust it enough to increase my stakes.
I see,
so it's like, so the money that it makes me, it's not going to change my life. So it's just there ticking over, making money, and I'm slightly proud of myself, but only slightly. But there's a limit to how many bills I can pay with it. You know, if I doubled my risk, I'd be concerned that I'm concerned that my assumption of what the worst case scenario is, i.e., that would be losing $4,000 over the course of 6 weeks. That's my assumed worst case scenario. But I'm not willing to turn that figure to be $8,000. Right?
Yes,
I'm not willing to double my stakes to be $8,000 down in 6 weeks.
Doesn't that represent smart investing and you know, the long game mentality? In that no one who's got into investing, unless they've been very lucky, you know, has ever benefited from a kind of roulette style investing. It's been about developing a system that works for you, and over a long period of time it becomes, and it's working the system. We spoke the other week about markets and morality and that sort of thing. People bet on the markets because so far so good. I'm interested at the moment about what's going to happen to entrepreneurialism in terms of the opportunities that will be available, because I've grown up through a couple of recessions, and I recognize that recessions are also huge opportunities for the right type of investment. But I do worry with this one because I feel that there was the safety net that would have existed before that would have meant that entrepreneurs would then continue to ride the storm or you know, get another loan after they've done their bankruptcy sort of exams. But I do worry this time round about what will happen. I think there'll be a lot of empty high streets.
Aha. So what's going to happen then? independent retailers. The councils will drop their
the rentals,
rents because they'll be forced to.
Yeah.
So in fact, the high street, there'll be some terrible growing pains, but I have great optimism for the British high street.
Well,
it sounds like some report on 5 Live, and I'm some politician put up, saying, actually, nothing to see here. We're fine. It's all good.
Well, let me just get it back, because this was not the intention of this podcast, to start dissecting the British future. But you're absolutely right. I mean, when the high streets in London, for example, all became very homogenized, the same franchises, the same corporations, there will be lost. There'll be lots of empty shops. And that means that there are property owners, commercial property owners, that want people in. And I was having this conversation the other day about what would those businesses be? Because unfortunately, a lot of them in the past probably would stand a chance. But now, with Amazon and online purchasing, it almost doesn't justify to have a retail outlet for a lot of things. But there are some things for which you can't get online. And there's some things that it's better to have a shop for. And I think creatives, the creative industries is what I'm thinking of, that are going to have opportunities, exhibition spaces, live venues, workshops, printing presses, things like that.
And people who make their own clothes, people who bake. And there'll be a lot of shared spaces where it might be under the umbrella of a particular cooperative, but within that there's a cafe, there's a record shop, whatever. There's an art space, exhibition space, as you say.
Yeah.
And if we look at what the high street was when we were kids, a lot of it was a load of bollocks.
Of course it was, yeah.
Homogenized, as you said. The distorted narratives again. There's a rather romantic notion of what the high street was, and it's largely false. The high streets looked very similar. Now, what is not false, what is a legitimate fear, is the independent retailers who survived the homogeny. They would get footfall off the back of the BHSs, the HMVs, the homogeny, and because people would park their car and do 3 hours of shopping, they'd pop in and buy stuff they didn't realise they needed. And so obviously, when HMV and whoever closes down, then there isn't so much footfall. But in time, when town centres become interesting again, and the consumer just gets used to the idea that if we're going to buy mass-produced items, we'll get nearly all of them online. If we're just used to this idea, and councils get real and government get real, that's where the crack is. Mass-produced items with low profit margins, except that is not the domain of the high street anymore. Once enough people realise this, then we'll see something really virtuous. And I think Britain is the perfect country for that.
Yeah.
I think that the kind of entrepreneurialism that Thatcher tapped into, that goes across working class and upper class as well, that's like that sort of maverick creative behaviour that means that the UK has more music festivals than anywhere else in Europe, even though the climate is terrible, right? It has more outdoor events by a bloody mile. That mentality, that's going to create some really interesting stuff on the high street, I think. And even though you think, well, where's the financial cushion? How is capitalism going to empower these people? Who says that they need to make profit in pounds and pence to survive, right? How much does it have to be in pounds and pence? How much of this could be in the exchange of services or with a currency that isn't the pound?
Yeah.
Perhaps the future of entrepreneurialism lies in trying to work around the capitalist system, actually, trying to work around the pounds and pence. And yeah, you're not going to pay your rent to a local council in Bitcoin, but you might be able to get some of your stock by exchanging something or by using a cryptocurrency. I think your business model can adapt and feel the benefits of some of the challenges to capitalism.
Yeah, I think I'm very optimistic as well. I'm really interested in seeing and almost interested in being a part of potentially looking into ideas about how that vacant space, which was previously taken up, unfortunately, by corporations, suddenly can be occupied by people and fans of those people, customers of those people, where their product or their service isn't something that falls under Amazon's, or ASOS's umbrella. And I think that's a really positive. I'm constantly, and I remember talking to you about this, constantly thinking about the positives from this year. And I think that's potentially one of them.
Yeah, it is, but getting there is going to be very painful because there is partly because a lot of people don't even have time to think about this and deconstruct it in the way you and I have, right? They have a belief for how the world works and how they can succeed within that world. And for some of that, or most of it, to have been taken away from them, they're having a more frantic mindset. They feel unlucky immediately. So they're not necessarily in the mood to be looking for the opportunity in this. Then, and this is what I find unforgivable, the people like you and I who have the time to think and deconstruct, but who are pressing for change like it's the 1970s. I'm going back again. That they think the way forward is to just raise income tax. And if Jeremy Corbyn gets elected, right, more funding for the NHS, then we'll be fine. And the very notion that you could perhaps build hospitals, with money that doesn't come from the Treasury. Suddenly it's like, oh, they're selling the NHS, etc. When in fact, what I want to see, even state services, I want them to be a bit detached from the state. Just because you detach something from the central government doesn't mean that you lose fairness. What about hospital and social care and healthcare provision being provided by more volunteers? What about building a space where your local building contractor doesn't actually get paid in money, but he gets various other services from people in that community, and into the bargain, he gets free healthcare from whoever is practicing in that building for the rest of his life or her life. These things it is possible to do things that solve or help to solve very big problems with quite simple small time solutions. I'm not talking about some revolution here.
Yeah. It's going back. I mean, it's happening here with the barter community, I think it's called.
Yeah. On
Facebook, and we've swapped some radiators for a photo shoot. That's a really good deal, and various other things. I think we got some cat litter and some lemons for a flask or something. I don't know, but this is an opportunity for people to kind of, to swap what they've got, and I think that mentality could work on a business level as well.
And it doesn't need to work in all cases either. I remember having a debate with my brother about this, and he's like, You know, he's a dyed-in-the-wool lefty, like an old-school socialist sort of well, that's what he believes in politics. The way he lives life isn't really like that. But he believes change should be like a 1980s Labour Party style of change. And, you know, he was picking all sorts of holes in it, saying, oh, well, what about, you know, they build a hospital in Newcastle, but they don't build one in Manchester. It doesn't all have to make absolute consistent sense to achieve a net positive. And this is a problem with national politics and national policy. You know, they're trying to be too right. You know, if we accept a level of inconsistency, you know, and accept that, you know, the phrase postcode lottery is bandied about, the amount of things that are driven towards avoiding a postcode lottery, that means that you have an average, right? And an average is okay in Victorian times. If you get your average to a point where people aren't dying of cholera and typhoid and they're able to read, happy days, well done. That's an average that's useful.
Yeah.
But once you've got civilization to a point where the average is at a certain level, you're not going to actually raise the mean average by trying to tackle the whole equation with big, far-reaching things. You know, disparate change is really that's all I'm campaigning for. That people who have expertise in certain areas should just, you know, give what they can in terms of time. You know, the tax should move more towards tax on time and service rather than tax on income, I would say. And within your own community, if you can solve a health problem or a housing problem or whatever, just with the skills that you've got, or help solve it, get halfway to solving it, then you're getting somewhere. You know, and other communities can do it. There's nothing to stop other communities copying your model, but your model doesn't have to be replicated in a binary way to suit every single town, city, and village.
Yeah, it's kind of what happened with the Ofsted system in education. It was, you know, a way of assessing the quality of a school and its teachers, but very, very rigid and unfair towards some, with the intention of raising the baseline quality. But in doing that, the intention creates the fallouts, you know, the schools that are under ridiculous pressure because they failed. I mean, that doesn't do them any good. And I did my teaching experience at a school that had come out of special measures, and the anxiety of the teachers, especially the one that was my tutor, about, we've just come out of special measures, it was a nightmare, we can't go back there. It almost was an override to a creative style of teaching. It instilled the,
never mind, almost.
Yeah. and that has a knockdown effect on the, you know, the quality of people's minds, really, you know, the expectations.
Like my dad had 2 breakdowns, you know, and that did for him. Trying to teach English to the people of Hartlepool is hard enough.
They don't speak English in Hartlepool.
It's a very funny accent there, I must say. Like, the Geordies get nearly all of the comical credit across the country. But actually, I think once you get to Hartlepool and Middlesbrough, it's even funnier. That Geordies are more about sort of punchline, tone of voice, and this sort of affability. There's a lot of movement. There's a lot of like that. Like, and so then I was like, there's a lot of comedic gesture with your Geordie. But once you get to Hartlepool and Middlesbrough, there's not the froth. There's just this detail. there's like this turning of the screw, like the sort of Vic and Bob when sort of it, you know, there's not that many punchlines. It's just this gradual detail.
There's a timing to it. This it's the choice of words and the timing, the rhythm of a conversation, which is so unique that it's funny by design rather than by intent, almost. Certainly from a Londoner perspective and a lover of the Geordie accent, I appreciate the subtleties of the Northeast now a lot more.
Yeah. There's a lot to it, and I've got a theory that in the Northeast, it's just a theory. I can't prove it, but because the industry, and let's be honest, accents are carried by industry, really. You know, well, most of the accents in England are traced back to the working classes rather than the upper classes. The industry in the Northeast was disparate. You'd have a coal mine that might sustain a community of in between, 500 and 20,000, let's say, depending on the size of the mine, or and so from that you would have gaps in the population. So they're not, the Northeast, there's quite a lot of people that live there, but actually Newcastle, Middlesbrough, and Sunderland they're big places, but there aren't that many other big places like that. And so there's variance in accent, just like only 2 or 3 miles, you can tell. And there's an accent called Pitmatic, which oh mate, if you heard that.
Can I search it on YouTube? Are they like? Yeah. You can. Okay. Pitmatic. Okay.
You'll find some instances. So it was a type of lingo that people used down the pit, but of course the pit stretched all over the Northeast. So there'd be a certain synergy between a pit that was 10 or 15 miles away that would kind of subvert what the accent was above ground, like literally. And so even now, even to this day, as fascinated as I am with accents and the fact that I'm from the Northeast, when I'm sitting at the cricket sometimes, just laughing to myself, hearing the old retired Geordies or Mackhams or Teessiders sitting behind me, I can't always tell which bit of the Northeast they're from. And I'm listening intently thinking, oh, well, that sounds a bit like, that's east of Newcastle, but that bit sounds a bit more like something, it's the accents. And I think, for example, there's more variance in accents across 10 miles in the Northeast than there would be across Greater London or Greater Manchester, say.
Right.
Because it joined on by buildings.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, they were disparate, like you say. They were, and they didn't travel too much. They were.
No.
Yeah.
No, they didn't.
It's almost like the same diversity you would find in. We were watching something last night, a series called Snowpiercer. I don't know if you saw the film about the train that was growing.
I did see the film. I thought it was a load of tosh.
It is just full of guns and stuff. Anyway, the series is worse. But there's an American guy who is Irish, but the diversity in his Irish accents led us to actually think, do you know what? We need to go back over his part and try and work out all the different counties of Ireland that he's trying to pick from. It's just like one man, many accents.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, there's so much humor in accents. Like, I'm so fascinated just by different colonial. As you know, I love the London, the Londoner, the taxi driver that goes like that. Alan Kirbishley.
Yeah.
Freddie Sears. Yeah.
Kirbishley's got that kind of. He's like the academic of the you know what I mean? He talks, he's Cockney, but he talks proper.
Yeah.
He talks proper. He doesn't say what was. He says that was. You know.
Yeah, he does. But at the end of the, you're right. But at the end of the day, he's still got a trench coat. He's still withering in some way or other. Going, yeah.
He's doing it.
Yeah, you're right. But he's the academic. He's the eloquent wing of it.
Like Pardew as well. Why does Charlton always end up with these characters? Fortunately now we've got Lee Bowyer, who's just
yeah, and as part of Distorted Narrative, I'm going to do a song called The District Line, and in that it's actually samples the Cockney, the Cockney from the Armando Iannucci shows and the Armistice. Bowflats? I know somebody at Bowflats. And he's having an argument with his hairdresser in the Armando Iannucci show. The beginning of the song is that, but really distorted. And then throughout the song, at a low volume, it's just going to be me like referencing 80s and 90s footballers that appear on the district line, like Cascarino, Kerry Dixon, like, but hardly anyone will be able to hear it. They'll be able to hear the district line whirring sound in the background, though. What a sound that is! You know the one, right?
I know it. Yeah, I mean, I actually fell asleep to it one New Year's Day. I was trying to get back from Fulham. And I fell asleep on the tube, and I woke up at about 2:30 in the afternoon going back the other way. So I must have been on the district line for about 4 or 5 hours.
Been to Upminster and back,
at least once, yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. I woke up once and I was in Beckton. Don't ever fall asleep on the DLR, kids. Anyway, like that sound, there's a particular bit, Wimbledon. I've read my grandmother and my 2 uncles live in Wimbledon. So from the age of 3, 4, I was going there and I was fascinated. It was just the graffiti, the words that would be sprayed on the walls, diet, rate, fume, exclamation mark. That was funny. And then the sound of the district line, particularly near Wimbledon, right?
Because it comes out from the underground, though, doesn't it? Sort of Barron's Court, Turner Green, after Earl's Court, it becomes overground.
It does. So you don't. So the rattle of the train isn't as loud because it isn't echoing in the tunnel, right? So the acoustics are different, and there's this set of points just outside Wimbledon. And it happens a couple of times where the power drops and the lights go dim on the tube and the sound goes wee, 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 like that. And it's the best thing ever. And it's indelible in my mind. And I've got this list of things I'm going to do when I go back to England, which is burgeoning the longer this lockdown goes. And one of them is record samples of District Line. Because I do have a sample that I found from some train spotters, like an old video of old District Line trains. So I've sampled a bit of that.
Really?
But it's not enough, right? I don't want to be changing the tone of that with a sampler. I want it to be the points between Wimbledon and Wimbledon Park. That, if you're going to do a song called The District Line, do it properly, right?
Yeah, I hope the trains are the same, and I hope that there's some little gap in the window that you can get your recording equipment out of, or just, I hope the recording conditions are friendly.
The recording conditions, it's going to be luck of the draw. So the plan is, like, there's a mate of mine in Carlisle who we like recording sounds. We like getting pissed, having a picnic.
Yeah.
Like, we sat by this railway bridge just out the back of his studio, and we had a picnic, recorded sounds, labelled them, and got gradually more and more hammered. So I'm going to invite him down to London, and we'll spend hours going between Wimbledon and West Brompton and back again, right? The overground bit of the south of District Line. And so within that time, the random factor will be in our favour. The conditions will suddenly be right.
That's right, yeah.
And hopefully we'll have some old Cockney geezer as well going,
yeah,
that's a bonus.
Just sitting down on the single seats, you know, the ones between the glass when you come in the door. There was always a couple of singles.
Yeah.
Just sitting down there with a duffel coat on, going,
Freddie Sears.
Freddie. Pat van der Nauw.
Yeah.
So listen, Mike, I think we're going to leave it there, if you're all right with that. I don't think we've got anywhere near. We should scratch the surface. So I'd like to think sometime in the future we could do this again.
Yeah. Whether the public would want that.
I hope so.
Yeah. Indeed. Plenty to talk about, as always, when you and I are in the room.
Yeah.
So what is happening next with this?
Well, first of all, thank you for being on. I'm recording again tomorrow, and I'll be recording all week. Yeah, we'll be putting these up on YouTube and available for public consumption.
But I would recommend you upload them as Facebook vids as well, because if you share a YouTube link on Facebook, you're nowhere in the algorithm.
In fact, I might need to bend your ear about algorithms, because that's for the next chat. Yeah.
That's for the next chat.
In fact, well, I found out where algorithms came from, and it was from the East Berlin sort of terrorist group of the 70s who were trying to find out what their parents were doing during the war. And they formed a little kind of student militia, really. And the only way for the state to find them was to employ a member of the police who said he could do it. And he used computers and algorithms to find out where they were. And it worked. And that was basically the first successful use of digital data gathering.
Ah, right.
And Facebook is using a very similar, similar architecture.
Yeah, it is, yeah. And I'm not scared of it either. You know, I love the possibilities of it. But as you can tell, my glass is fuller than a lot of people. But I think there's so much potential in this data, and what I'm doing with my the work that I'm doing in Silicon Valley for the app for radiologists looking at their X-rays, looking at their MRIs. There's so much that we are doing with machine learning and artificial intelligence and big amounts of data that we then fire through a very clever algorithm. That's going to save lives. Like it will, you know, and we're selling it as such. You know, people are going to buy this because it means they're more likely to detect a cancerous mole or whatever, or you know, even they're just more likely to diagnose a sprained ankle more quickly, to free themselves up more time when they do see a cancerous mole, when they need to get on the phone. You know, there's so much that you can in the one sense, you can detect previously undetectable things more quickly. And in another sense, and in another side of AI, another positive, is that you can do menial tasks more quickly to free up the humans to detect things.
Yeah. The symbiotic relationship of us and machines has got to get more sophisticated, and we're the ones that are driving the cutting edge of it. Really, we're a long way away, apart from the people that would have you believe that because of quantum computers and AI that we're suddenly going to become obsolete. I mean, it's nowhere near there at the moment, and in the meantime, there's plenty of work to do.
And if it did get to that point, enough humans would have had to have wanted it to be the case.
As well.
Wouldn't make it right, but they would have had to have built those systems and linked them together and had them in charge of nuclear weapons or whatever and switched them on, right? For the machines to take over. You know, it would have had to have been set up by humans would have had to have built them.
Yeah.
You know, oh
God, yeah, and humans can just turn them off as well.
Yeah. You know, there's again that's hours of conversation.
It is,
and guess what? I think there's too much negative fuss made about it. Shot that is my stance on that, on AI. That there's a lot of fuss and people are just being stupid. And guess what? Drum roll, please. They're stuck in the 1970s.
Mate. Well, look, on that very funny note, we'll say good evening. Thank you so much, Mike. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome.
And I hope you have a nice evening after this. Enjoy the snooker. I hope Stephen Hendry, well, he hasn't apparently distracted you that much. So
well, stop press. He lost 4-1 during our conversation. Oh, well. Now it's some cycling from Belgium. So I don't think I'll be watching that. I don't know what I'll be watching. But yeah, anyway, I will have a good evening. I have enjoyed the chat. And I hope to see you soon. By God, how long is this lockdown going to last? Jesus.
You've been very good. You'll be unleashed on us all again soon, mate.
Yeah, there's only so much live sport and wanking a man can take.
And you're putting it to the test.
Yeah. Tried and tested. Yeah. I would quite like to leave this place and do that somewhere else. No, only joking. Anyway, I will see you later, Ian.
All right, buddy. Night.